in the media. They created this fantasy monster image, and it's been going on for the last 12 years. And I've ever had no comment, and I had no need to talk to the media for the simple reason that they were looking for sensationalism and they were looking for the monster.
Fantasy monster image, what are you referring to by that?
Well, the idea that I'm a homosexual thrill killer and all that garbage.
Hey, I got news for you. I killed 33 times. You're only gonna kill me once. Casey outsmarted him again.
He was a man who hid his evil behind a painted smile, a respected contractor and neighbor, a volunteer who donned a clown suit to bring joy to children. John Wayne Gacy could shake your hand with one moment's warmth and take a life with the next. His was a story of deception so convincing that for years, no one suspected that one of America's most prolific serial killers was living quietly in suburban Chicago. To the world, he was a businessman, a husband, a neighbor who threw big backyard parties. But behind closed doors, Gacy was something else entirely, something monstrous. John Wayne Gacy's life began in a modest Chicago home in 1942. The second of 3 children, he grew up in a working-class neighborhood under the iron hand of his father, John Stanley Gacy, a World War I veteran. His father was an alcoholic with a volatile temper, a man who used his fists to communicate disappointment and his words to humiliate his son. Gacy's mother, Marion, was a source of comfort, but she couldn't shield him from the constant criticism and physical abuse. Gacy grew up believing he would never be good enough. He doubted his masculinity, felt emasculated, and buried his anger deep inside. At just 11 years old, Gacy suffered a traumatic head injury when a swing struck him in the temple. Over the next 5 years, he experienced recurring blackouts, and doctors eventually discovered a blood clot in his brain. With medication, his physical condition improved, but Gacy had already learned to manipulate the sympathy of others. He feigned heart problems and illnesses, turning them into tools to control the people around him. This early taste of manipulation would become a hallmark of his adult life. After dropping out of high school without graduating, Gacy moved to Las Vegas in his late teens, where he worked briefly in the funeral industry. The job exposed him to death, but risky, rather than traumatize him. It seemed to intrigue him. He returned to Chicago and enrolled in a business college, quickly discovering a natural gift for persuasion. Gacy was a born salesman, charming and charismatic, capable of talking his way into and out of almost anything. He graduated, took a job as a shoe salesman, and began to craft the image of a respectable, ambitious man on the rise. In 1964, Gacy married Marlyn Myers, a co-worker whose family owned 3 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. The couple moved to Iowa, and Gacy quickly immersed himself in the family business. He became the manager of the restaurants and, within months, a respected member of the community. He joined the JCs, a leadership and networking group, where he was well-liked and considered a man of promise. But Gacy's dark impulses were already surfacing. He developed a reputation for inviting young male employees to his home, plying them with alcohol, and making sexual advances. In 1968, his secret life began to unravel. A teenage boy accused Gacy of sexual assault. In a desperate attempt to silence the victim, Gacy hired a man to beat him. But the scheme backfired. He was arrested and charged with sodomy. Facing overwhelming evidence, Gacy pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. His wife filed for divorce, taking their 2 children with her. For most men, this would have been a devastating fall from grace. But Gacy's response was chillingly calculating. In prison, he became a model inmate, impressing guards and officials with his charm and leadership skills. He supervised kitchen staff, organized events, and seemed reformed. Less than 2 years into his sentence, Gacy was granted parole. He was released in 1970 after serving just 18 months. On paper, he was a man who had turned his life around. In reality, he was just getting started. Determined to rebuild his reputation, Gacy returned to Chicago and found work in construction. By 1971, he launched his own company, PDM Contractors, which specialized in remodeling homes. He remarried in 1972, tying the knot with Carol Hoff, a divorcee with 2 daughters. They moved into a modest ranch-style house at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, the home that would become a house of horrors. Gacy became a beloved member of his community, throwing lavish parties for neighbors, involving himself in politics, and even entertaining children as his alter ego, Pogo the Clown. Pogo became a symbol of Gacy's ability to hide in plain sight. Wearing his homemade clown costume, Gacy would visit hospitals and birthday parties, making balloon animals and performing tricks. Neighbors thought he was eccentric but generous, a man dedicated to helping others. What they didn't know was that beneath the clown makeup, Gacy harbored an uncontrollable darkness. By late 1971, Gacy had completed his parole, and just months later, he murdered for the first time. His victims were almost always vulnerable young men, teenage runaways, sex workers, and drifters who wouldn't be missed right away. Gacy would often approach them while driving, flashing a fake police badge or claiming to be an officer. Once they were in his car, he'd bring them home, offering them food, drinks, or marijuana to gain their trust. Then came his infamous magic handcuff trick. He would demonstrate how to escape from handcuffs, slipping them on himself and showing how easily he could get free. When the young man tried it, Gacy would snap the cuffs shut and sneer, "You're not getting out of this one." What followed was torture, rape, and murder. Gacy strangled many of his victims with a rope, using a stick as a tourniquet. Others were suffocated with rags stuffed into their mouths. Once the deed was done, he buried their bodies in the crawl space beneath his home. When he ran out of room, he began dumping bodies in nearby rivers. In 1976, Gacy divorced his second wife, giving him free reign over the house. With no one to question the strange smells or late-night visitors, his murders escalated. That same year, he committed his first double homicide. His depravity deepened, and yet no one suspected him. He kept his public life polished and thriving. Gacy even became politically active, volunteering for the Democratic Party and posing for photographs with influential leaders. In May 1978, he shook hands with First Lady Rosalind Carter, wearing a Secret Service lapel pin that indicated he had passed a background check. The photo would later become one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence of his ability to deceive. By 1977 and 1978, Gacy was killing with increasing frequency. He had perfected his method and was confident he could outsmart law enforcement. In a twisted display of unpredictability, he even released one victim, allowing him to live. The survivor would later testify, but at the time, police dismissed the claims, allowing Gacy to continue his reign of terror. Everything changed on December 11, 1978, when Gacy murdered his 33rd and final victim, 15-year-old Robert Piest. The boy was last seen leaving a pharmacy where he worked, telling a coworker he was going to meet a contractor about a job. That contractor was Gacy. Robert never returned, and his disappearance immediately raised alarm. Unlike many of Gacy's earlier victims, Robert had a loving family who reported him missing right away. Police began their investigation and quickly traced the boy's last known whereabouts back to Gacy. When officers first visited Gacy's home, they were struck by the odd smell coming from beneath the floorboards. Gacy brushed it off, blaming faulty plumbing. But when detectives dug into his history and discovered his previous conviction for sexual assault, suspicion grew. They obtained a search warrant, and what they found inside would horrify the world. In the crawl space beneath his modest suburban home, police unearthed the first body, then another, and another. The scale of the horror slowly revealed itself. 29 bodies buried beneath the house, 5 more dumped in nearby rivers. Gacy had turned his home into a burial ground, his victims stacked in layers like discarded objects. On December 22, 1978, Gacy confessed. He described his murders with chilling detail, explaining how he would lure, assault, and kill his victims, sometimes keeping their bodies under his bed or in his attic before burying them. The nation was stunned. Gacy wasn't just a serial killer. He was a predator who had thrived in plain sight, hiding behind a mask of normalcy. When John Wayne Gacy was finally arrested, the world was in shock. The clown costume, the political connections, the smiling neighborhood contractor, none of it fit the image of a serial killer. The discovery of 29 bodies buried in the crawl space of his Chicago home was almost too grotesque to comprehend. As police exhumed the remains, the true scale of his crimes emerged. The victims were boys and young men, many of them runaways or troubled teens, their disappearances largely overlooked by authorities until it was far too late. It was a nightmare hiding in the heart of suburbia. The police investigation into Gacy's home became a media spectacle. Reporters gathered outside 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, cameras rolling as each body bag was carried out. The suburban neighborhood that once saw Gacy as a friendly neighbor now saw his home as a house of death. Inside, investigators meticulously documented every corner. They discovered that Gacy had carefully organized his burial sites, digging trenches under the house and labeling them in a twisted system only he understood. The crawl space had become his private graveyard, the smell of death so strong that seasoned detectives were overwhelmed. Gacy's calm demeanor during his confession shocked law enforcement. He spoke in detail about how he would lure his victims, restrain them with his magic handcuff trick, and kill them. He claimed that many of the murders were acts of rage or even accidents. But his elaborate system of burial suggested something far more chilling. He admitted to sometimes keeping the bodies under his bed or in his attic for days, as if he couldn't bring himself to part with them. His willingness to describe his crimes in such a matter-of-fact way revealed a man without remorse, someone who had spent years compartmentalizing the horror he inflicted. In total, authorities recovered 33 victims linked to Gacy. Many of them were never identified, their remains too decomposed to name. This was one of the most prolific serial killings in American history, and it changed the way police approached missing persons cases. Gacy had specifically targeted young men who were often overlooked, runaways, sex workers, and kids from unstable homes. For years, they vanished without raising alarms, giving Gacy the opportunity to kill again and again. In 1980, Gacy stood trial for 33 murders. Prosecutors painted him as a manipulative predator, a man who lived a double life. During the day, he was a successful contractor and community member. By night, he was a killer who buried his victims beneath his feet. The defense argued that Gacy was insane, claiming he suffered from multiple personality disorder and was not in control of his actions when he committed the crimes. Psychiatrists examined him extensively, but the court found him competent to stand trial. The trial became one of the most sensational in Illinois history. Photographs of Gacy dressed as Pogo the Clown were plastered on newspapers nationwide, cementing him as the terrifying killer clown. The contrast between the cheerful face paint and his monstrous crimes became a symbol of evil hiding behind a mask of normalcy. Jurors heard detailed testimony from surviving victims, police officers, and forensic experts. They learned of the handcuff trick, the torture, and the sheer brutality of Gacy's acts. On March 13, 1980, the jury deliberated for just 2 hours before finding John Wayne Gacy guilty of 33 counts of murder. The verdict was unanimous. He would receive the death penalty. The judge sentenced him to death by lethal injection, and Gacy was sent to Menard Correctional Center, where he would spend the next 14 years on death row. In prison, Gacy remained disturbingly calm. He adjusted to life behind bars easily, continuing to manipulate those around him. He granted interviews to journalists, claiming he had been framed or that other people were involved in the killings. He denied being a serial killer, despite overwhelming evidence. His narcissism was on full display. He seemed more concerned about his reputation than the lives he destroyed. One of the strangest aspects of Gacy's time in prison was his foray into art. He began painting, often depicting clowns, skulls, and even images of himself as Pogo. His paintings became notorious, with some selling for thousands of dollars to collectors fascinated by murderabilia. Critics argued that the fascination with Gacy's artwork glorified his crimes, while others saw it as a disturbing glimpse into his twisted mind. While Gacy awaited his execution, families of his victims endured years of pain. Many of the boys he killed remained unidentified for decades, and their loved ones lived with unanswered questions. Over time, advancements in forensic science and DNA testing allowed investigators to name more of Gacy's victims, bringing long overdue closure to grieving families. But some victims remain unknown to this day, a haunting reminder of how many young men slipped through the cracks of society. On May 10, 1994, after 14 years on death row, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois. Even in his final moments, he showed no remorse. His last words were chillingly dismissive, "Kiss my ass." At 12:58 a.m., Gacy was pronounced dead. The execution itself was not without controversy. One of the intravenous lines clogged, causing the process to take 18 minutes instead of the usual few. Some saw it as a fittingly slow end for a man who had inflicted so much pain. Outside the prison, crowds gathered, some holding signs celebrating his death, others protesting capital punishment. For many, Gacy's execution closed a chapter, but the shadow of his crimes would never fully fade. After his death, Gacy's home at 818 West Summerdale Avenue was demolished. The crawl space that had served as his burial ground was filled in, and the property was cleared. But the lot has remained largely empty, as if no one wanted to live on ground so stained by evil. Gacy's belongings, including his infamous clown costumes, were destroyed or auctioned off. Even his brain was studied by scientists, who found no abnormalities, no physical explanation for the monster he became. John Wayne Gacy's legacy is one of horror, but it also forced law enforcement to change. His case highlighted the vulnerabilities of marginalized youth, the gaps in missing persons investigations, and the dangers of assuming that evil has a certain look or demeanor. Gacy was the friendly neighbor, the businessman, the man in a clown suit making kids laugh. He didn't fit the stereotype of a killer, and that's precisely why he was able to evade suspicion for so long. Psychologists have debated for decades what made Gacy tick. Some point to his abusive childhood, his struggles with his sexuality, and his need for control. Others argue that Gacy was a psychopath, a man born without empathy, who viewed people as objects to manipulate and discard. His IQ of 118 suggested intelligence above the average, and he used it to outwit police and charm his way through life. But no analysis can truly explain the depth of his cruelty. Even now, decades later, John Wayne Gacy remains one of the most infamous killers in history. He is often mentioned in the same breath as Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and other predators who became symbols of pure evil. His story has been retold in documentaries, books, and films, each trying to make sense of the man who buried his crimes beneath his own feet. The image of Pogo the Clown has become iconic, a symbol of the way evil can hide in plain sight. The fascination with Gacy isn't just about the number of his victims or the brutality of his acts. It's about the mask he wore so well. He was a killer who attended political fundraisers, posed with the First Lady, and handed out balloons to children. He was proof that monsters don't always lurk in dark alleys. They can live next door, smiling and waving, blending seamlessly into ordinary life. That duality is what makes his story so haunting. Today, investigators continue to revisit Gacy's case, hoping to identify his remaining unknown victims. Advances in forensic science, particularly genetic genealogy, have given families hope that they might one day learn what happened to their missing sons. Every time a victim is identified, it serves as a reminder of the human toll behind the headlines. These were boys with families, dreams, and futures stolen by a man who saw them as disposable. In the end, John Wayne Gacy's story is not just about a serial killer. It's about the countless lives he destroyed, the families who endured decades of pain, and the terrifying realization that true evil can wear a smile. The man who once painted his face to entertain children became a symbol of pure darkness. His crimes forced a nation to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, vulnerability, and the monsters who walk among us. And though Gacy has been gone for over 30 years, his shadow lingers, a chilling reminder of how a charming handshake and a painted grin can hide the deadliest intentions.